Did our ancestors really have it so rough, particularly with farming? Yes, I believe so. In our perspective of farming, yeah, it was rough if you only look at the lifestyle of farming by itself as an isolated labor. But our ancestors didn't need to rely entirely on farming. In fact, before farming was really a full commitment for many families. They lived off the wilds of the lands, the wild animals, and they were doing just fine. They didn't need to farm, to have farm animals, because the wildlife was so plentiful for everybody, as well as plants. They understood in large part what the medicinal plants were, and were able to pick them and harvest them and make the practices of preservation for the winters and be fully functional. I mean, that's how the Indians did it before the Americans arrived, and they were quite effective in that lifestyle. But as more people came and as populations grew, we started turning away from wildlife subsistence and more towards farming. Farmers got more powerful. Okay, and of course, yeah. If you look at farming by itself, it was pretty rough. I read a statistics, and I forget where I found that statistic exactly, but it took 2 weeks for a bushel of wheat. Okay, whereas now it takes 5 minutes. All right, and I think now I meant more like 1900 actually, and improved to 5 minutes per bushel of farm labor per 5 minutes of farm labor compared to the early 1800s where it took 2 weeks. And that's looking at farming by itself as like if somebody were to commit to farming 100% as their sole source of food production and all that, then yeah, that's a struggle. But once again, there was plenty of wildlife out there, and even if your farming failed, you had hunting and fishing and gathering to rely on and be very effective with. Whereas today, that's not so much an option now. They didn't have EPA and the DNR. You didn't have to worry about cops using very sneaky methods in catching you illegally poaching. They would call it poaching. Not sure when that word was invented, but it definitely became a law where it used to not be. And our perspectives change as a result of these lifestyle changes, as a result of just the complete die-off of wildlife. Now, I mean, back on Dodo Bird Island, the birds walked right up to the sailors, and the sailor easily had their meal. It sounds like they could just literally choke the dodos to death because they were so friendly and have their meals. Well, that's changed now. Now it's mostly farm animals, it seems, and there's a protectors of the land that the farm animals are on. There's fences. I mean, I think that there was just a catastrophic loss in wildlife with the building of the fences. I mean, I've walked along fence lines and just looked at. I've inspected quite a few fence lines, and you could just see the animals, the animal tracks that have to follow the fence line. All right, it's a struggle. I've seen pictures of elk caught in fence. All right, there is just a huge transition from wildlife to farm animals, which gives farmers a lot of power. All right, they have control by the collective like establishment of fences and protection areas and laws with private property. Now it's you have to rely on farming, and if you can't farm, then your next step is not hunting, like what our ancestors used to fall back on. Now it's begging in a way. I don't carry any guns. If I Yeah, if it was, back 100 years ago, I would. But today, no, it's instead of a gun, I carry a camera. My hunting isn't in the woods. It's on the internet and in cities looking for food banks. I hunt for food banks, and figure out their times and days, kind of like I'm stalking prey, I guess. Um, I have to be stealthy about it a little bit. Cooking is not really an option being a homeless person. Imagine people used to spend days out in the woods hunting and stalking. Um, but when homeless people try to sleep outside, it's considered a mental illness. It's such a strange transition. I think people don't learn history like they should. That might be a large problem with how our perspectives are just seemingly so twisted on how we look at things. Just simply looking at the farming. If you looked at looking at farming by our standards today, back then, people think, wow, they had it rough. But once again, there was some really helpful fallback positions with hunting, fishing, and gathering, where it was very seamless compared to today. Um, yeah, I've seen video where there's like tens of deer out in a field, but I mean, as far as I understand, there were a lot more wildlife animals out there. I mean, if you go to uh, it's west, it's northwest of not Seattle, but Olympia. There's they had a massive hunt, and people are paying bounties for bear up in the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest, in the 1950s. They had bear fests where they're just killing bear left and right. Now that no bear exists anymore. At least when I walked out in the woods in that area, I didn't see any. So a lot of this massive kill off was occurring up until as recent as 1950, at least. Okay, yeah, the Idaho Power Company says that they were conscious of environmentalism as early as the 1920s, but I don't think too much was done, because you can't fish in droves like they used to. I heard one guy said you couldn't put a cup of water, you couldn't take a cup and scoop out water without having a fish in it. And this was in Northern California. The uh, the people were really just living off of the lands after the Indians were kind of died out from disease and stuff. There was a plentiful, it was bountiful. We hear about how the Pilgrims had it so difficult on the East Coast. Now, I don't fully understand how that could be. They experienced freezing problems, and they had issues with vitamin C deficiencies, and a lot of pilgrims are dying out. But I mean, the land has been pretty plentiful. It's hard to imagine. It could be maybe the hostilities from the Indians. I'm not sure, but yeah, I'm just saying our perspectives have changed with farming, at least, and that those fallback positions, if your farming didn't work out back then, it's you could look at a different habit, whereas today it's seemingly turned into begging almost.